Hello, my name is Derek Atkins, and this is Saints and Sinners, the video channel that dives into the Bible to see what God has to say to us today. This video is the third part of a special series of videos entitled Signs of the Times. In these videos, we are looking at the words that Jesus spoke in Matthew 24, where he gave a series of signs that will precede his glorious return. You can also find many of these same signs in Mark 13 and Luke 21 if you want to compare these passages with each other. Last week, we looked at the first sign, which is the sign of false teachings, false teachers, and false prophets. This week, we're going to look at the second sign, which is wars and rumors of wars. So let's look and see what Jesus has to say about wars and rumors of wars. In Matthew 24, verses 6 and 7a, Jesus spoke these words, "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom." Now, Jesus, in these verses, Jesus warns us that we will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but he also warns us not to be alarmed because such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Humans have fought wars throughout recorded history. Very rarely have we ever had a year when there hasn't been any kind of fighting between kingdoms or nations. And yet, Jesus does include wars as one of the signs of his imminent return. How are we to understand this? I must confess that I wrestled with how to approach this episode, because in verse 8 of Matthew 24, Jesus tells us that these various signs that he has given us are like birth pains. That is, they will become more and more frequent and more intense the closer his return comes. But if you look at the last 75 years or so, you'll find a very different picture. Here's a chart that records the number of deaths from wars since the end of World War II. What we see here is that the number of deaths has fallen sharply since the end of World War II, largely due to the introduction of precision-guided munitions, such as smart bombs, which are often used to target only military targets while making every effort to avoid civilian targets. Now, we are starting to see an uptick in the number of deaths due in large part to the war in Ukraine, because the Russian military does not focus on trying to limit civilian casualties. In fact, during past conflicts, the Russian military simply leveled entire cities to the ground. Think of how they razed Grozny in Chechnya, or their near obliteration of Aleppo in Syria. Now, here's another chart that illustrates the number of deaths over a much longer period of time, over the last 600 years. This chart shows us that there have been many wars over the centuries. But notice what happened in the 20th century. There was a major cluster of wars, World War I and World War II, followed by many smaller wars. many of which were proxy wars between the major world powers of the 20th century, such as Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, and the United States. Nor does this chart include the wars since 2000, such as the Afghan War, the Iraq War, or the Russo-Ukrainian War. The decline in the number of war deaths since 1945 is a very good thing, and it is something we should celebrate. But this doesn't quite suggest that wars are becoming more frequent or more intense, does it? On the other hand, we now live in a world with nuclear weapons, and all it would take would be one major nuclear exchange between Russia and America, or between China and America, or even between Russia and China, and in less than half an hour, the world would see far more deaths than all of World War II. So, how should we understand this paradox? Are we seeing fewer wars, or are we seeing more wars? Will we see Jesus come back in our lifetime, or will he delay his coming for another generation? The short answer is we simply don't know. During my teenage years, I read many of Hal Lindsey's books on Bible prophecy back in the 1980s, and I was very eager for Jesus's return, as all of us should be. But I found that as the years rolled by, Jesus still hadn't returned. So my approach toward Bible prophecy changed. I now believe that Jesus could return at any time, but for whatever reason, all the pieces that signal his imminent return haven't quite come together yet. For this reason, I take a wait and see approach to Jesus's return. I expect and long for Jesus's return, but I don't know when he'll come back. So I keep watching the signs of the time, and I continue to be faithful in doing the work Jesus has called me to do. In the meantime, if we take Jesus's word seriously, we should expect to see an increase in the number and severity of wars in the years immediately leading up to Jesus's return. So we shouldn't be surprised to see more wars in our lifetime. Already, we're seeing the largest European war since the end of World War II taking place in Ukraine. Many international relations experts expect a major war to break out between China and the United States sometime in the next 4 to 5 years. Now, I live in Singapore, so such a war would directly affect me and my students who come from all over the Asia-Pacific region. And I pray that there will not be a major war between China and America. But this is something many international relations experts are predicting could happen in the very near future. There are many other potential hotspots for wars, including Africa, South Asia, the Middle East, and the Caucasus. And if the era of Pax Americana comes to an end soon, then we will probably see many, many other conflicts break out. But Jesus still counsels us not to be alarmed by reports of wars and rumors of wars, because sadly, wars have been a constant feature of human history. We've always had wars, and human nature being what it is, we will continue to have wars until Jesus returns. And then, when Jesus returns, he will establish perfect peace and justice on the earth. Until then, we need to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus and live for him always. So if you've enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. If you want to receive notification of the next video in this series, please click on the subscribe button. And if you have any comments or questions, please type them in the space below. So until I see you again next time, God bless and keep your eyes on Jesus.